I feel very much humbled by this because having been in this vineyard for more than 40 years, I know just how many other people deserve this more than I do. But I also know how important it is for you to be here today. When we say, as Lee Edwards has pointed out, that the message of Pope John Paul II and all those who care about freedom was do not be afraid. The related message of that is do not be afraid because you are not alone. It is knowing that there are people like yourselves here and elsewhere around the world that gives people courage to stand up against authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. Knowing that you're not alone makes it easier. It takes nothing away from the heroism of the people who do it, but it is important to remember that. I would like to just make a few comments because we are standing in the shadow of a statue that means enormous amount to all of us. Everyone here, and many other places as well, was thrilled when the peoples of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet space a quarter of a century ago demolished many of the statues to Soviet and communist heroes that Moscow had imposed on them. And many here now are delighted to see ever more of the statues of this kind coming down in Ukraine. Indeed, what some call the Lenin Fall has become almost a barometer of how far toward Europe and away from Russia and totalitarianism and the Soviet past the Ukrainians have succeeded in coming. But in focusing on the demise of these statues and what the men and women who were memorialized in them represent, we all too often forget the importance of statues and monuments as such to the people who have pulled down these memorials to monsters and who have sought to put up their own heroes. That is something we here need to think about as we look at the monument to the victims of communism in Washington, a city that is filled with monuments that speak to the deepest feelings of both the American people and those around the world. If we focus on that, it seems to me, we will better understand why this monument is so important, not only for us, but for all those who are still oppressed or who have chosen freedom and succeeded. To make my point, I'd like to share with you two stories, one set in Estonia and the other here in Washington. The first involves a 1936 Estonian novel that was made into a brilliant 2002 movie called Names in Marble. It tells the story of young Estonians who fought against communist forces in the Estonian War of Independence. Many of them died for their country, and after Estonia won its independence, villages and towns across that country put up marble plinths on the main in the main squares of those towns, in which they listed the names of those who had given the ultimate sacrifice. 20 years later, when Stalin's communist forces returned and occupied Estonia, one of the very first things the new communist government did was to seek to destroy these monuments. But before the Soviet activists could do that, the people of Estonia took the marble plinths with the names of those who had died and buried them so that the names in marble would never be taken away from them. When the Soviet Union began to dissolve in the late 1980s, the people of Estonia dug up these marble plinths and they restored them back on the surviving monuments or built new monuments so that the old plinths would have a place to go. If you travel there and visit any one of dozens of villages, you will see the names incised in marble, which are a continuing testimonial to how important the struggle for freedom and against communism was. The second story is a personal one and involves my proudest moment as an American official, and it also involves words incised in marble. In 1990-1991, I worked at the State Department as a special advisor to the Secretary for Soviet Nationality Problems and Baltic Affairs. We did make that distinction. One of my jobs was to play host to visitors from these countries, occupied, and show them something of the city of Washington. I can't remember today precisely how many times I did it, putting them in my car and driving them from place to place around this city. But I can remember what mattered to them, and I can tell you the story, one story, that neither I nor those who were there will ever forget. I believe, and I suspect many of you do as well, that the closest thing we Americans have to a civic cathedral is the Lincoln Memorial. If there is one place that speaks to all of us as Americans, it is the Lincoln Memorial. And so I always arranged my visits for these people so we would end up at the Lincoln Memorial. If you wanted to make a political point, that was the way to do it. On March 29th, 1991, a very dark and rainy day here, I took the President and Foreign Minister of Estonia on such a tour, and we ended up there as planned. Because the only common language all three of us had at the moment was Russian, I was translating Lincoln's words from the Gettysburg Address that are incised in marble on the left side of that building into that language. I know, of course, that no one can translate Lincoln. Certainly I can't. But I was doing the best I could, and apparently my Russian was attracting the attention of the National Park Rangers who worked there. One of them came running up and he said, "What language are you speaking?" Because he's got these folders to hand out if he's got one of those languages. And I said, "We're speaking Russian." "Oh," he said, "are these people from Russia?" And I said, "No, these people are from Estonia." And without missing a heartbeat, this National Park Ranger, in his little cap or a little hat with the wide brim, smiled and said, "Oh, I've heard of Estonia. It's just a little country that wants to be free." Vox Populi, Vox Dei. Everyone in our group teared up, and I am quite confident, because of the conversations I had with the people later, that these words of an ordinary American who was expressing the deepest and most broadly held values of the American people made a bigger impression on and had a greater influence on those Estonian visitors than any words at the White House or in Capitol Hill. That's why it's important we do what we do. The basic strength and decency of America is well reflected in what is incised in marble in the monuments around this city. These inscriptions not only capture the essence of our country, but ensure that that essence continues from generation to generation. I am proud to have the chance to speak at the Victims of Communism Monument because it is playing exactly that role and is ensuring that in the future, when those who are victims of communism, past or present, are able to come to the United States, they will be because of the efforts of those who have raised this monument and be able to hear from another ordinary American, "Yes, we've heard of your plight. We know and we support your struggle to be free. That's why we were here. They must not be afraid because we are with them." Thank you very much.